Welcome to what I hope will be a short press conference this morning, where I can provide you the bit of update here and there. My apologies for the few minutes late start, but I hope that I'll be able to give you some information and answer a few questions from you this morning. As you would have been aware, as per the information we've been putting out on a consistent basis, the Minister of Energy and myself have been very engaged in trying to bring closure to a major assignment of the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago. And it has to do with getting the best for us in the hydrocarbon sector, which is an area of great interest nowadays, where there are changes being put upon us and there are challenges with respect to our own capacity, production levels and earnings from the international marketplace. I want to take this morning to anchor this whole situation in the facts and also in the experience and the initiatives that we have pursued and that we are experiencing. To do so, I will ask the staff to put up on the screen a diagram, the source of which is from the Ministry of Finance, printed in September 2022. And you will get a copy of this diagram, so don't worry too much about it. The staff will give you a copy if you have not already studied it, because it's a public document. It would have been put out by the Ministry of Finance, and it's come from the Trinidad and Tobago economy. The reason why I'm putting this diagram up is because it has in it all the elements that would indicate why the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been so focused on dealing with the energy sector. If you look at the blue bars there, those blue columns, they indicate the energy sector revenues. And the orange bars indicate the non-energy sector. And I think I'd be correct in pointing out that in this kind of analysis, when they speak about non-energy, which is manufacturing and other things, included in that bar is the input from the manufacturing at Point Lisas, the petrochemical sector. So you have to bear that in mind. So while our other manufacturing doing well, that kind of height of that bar includes the significant input from Point Lisas. And that, you know, Point Lisas is also reliant on the gas markets and the gas availability and so on. So bear that in mind. But look at the blue bars. And those blue bars, 2018, 2019, 2020 COVID, right? 2021, and of course 2022. And I want the national community, if you want to go back a little further, to 2015, you will get an even clearer picture, because you would have seen the precipitous decline from good earnings down to almost calamitous levels. And I'm not here adding the COVID stress on that. And any government looking at Trinidad and Tobago circumstances would realize that we had a fierce urgency to address those blue bars. Because without those blue bars, doesn't matter what we talk about, the multiplier effect of the energy sector is what drives and keeps the economy whole in the way that we know it. And the government could not sit back and allow that situation that you see with those blue bars to continue as our projection for the future. And that is why I want to quote for you from the final cabinet note that dealt with this matter. And it's a cabinet note dated the 1st of December. And I will also give you 3 pages of that cabinet note. We don't normally circulate cabinet notes, But the first 3 pages are informative, so I have authorized my staff to give you the first 3 pages. But I want to quote for it just to put you in the correct perspective. And is that on December 1st, which is the same, we left here that night to go to Europe, to go to London. The matter for the consideration of Cabinet is the definitive agreements among the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Atlantic LNG Company, BPTT, Shell, National Gas Company, and Atlantic LNG. All those entities, ladies and gentlemen, are in fact the heartbeat of the economy and the decision-making as they affect the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And it makes reference to Cabinet Minute of the 3rd of May 2018, when it agreed that an empowered team be set up to represent the government in negotiations with Shell and BP to address gas-related issues in Trinidad and Tobago. These negotiations led to agreement between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and BPTT, as outlined in the Cabinet Minute of November 29, 2018, and Cabinet Minute dated September 3rd, 2020, and with Shell, as outlined in Cabinet Minute of May 23rd, 2019, and the Minute of August 15, 2019. The point I'm making here is that you would have gathered that the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago has been moved and exercised and has been working very assiduously and focused on this issue. And these reference to these Cabinet decisions are the decisions that drove the process of these negotiations. And of course, it has to do with the Atlantic LNG facility, which comprises 4 LNG trains, each with different shareholder structures and commercial arrangements. It was agreed that the Atlantic LNG facilities would be managed more efficiently if brought under the framework of a single ownership structure. That approach was driven by the government of Trinidad and Tobago in those references to the Cabinet interventions I just mentioned. In March 2019, the shareholders of Atlantic LNG, BPTT, Shell, NGC, and CIC signed a letter of intent affirming their willingness to discuss with the government of Trinidad and Tobago the restructuring of Atlantic LNG. So we had to move the situation from where it was to get an agreement to discuss it. And of course, that was only one step along the way. In the discussions that followed, agreement was reached on a heads of agreement, which outlined the principles on which the definitive agreements would be based. And that is to be seen in Cabinet Minute of January 19th, 2022 and June 30th, 2022. That was the date targeted for completion of the definitive agreements. However, the projected timeline did not cater for the complexity, because one of the things we discovered as we moved this along is that we couldn't talk to all these people in the same room at the same time, because that would have been in breach of certain laws, and we could have been accused of price fixing and so on. So to drive these negotiations, we had to talk to each entity separately and apart, date, time, and place. And that would have been one of the reasons why I would have been seeing us going back and forth, because we couldn't just all get together in a room and fix the price and then come in the international market and say we want to trade. We would all have been guilty of serious legal breaches. So we did revise the date for completion to March 31st, 2023. But again, carrying horses to water might be one thing. Getting them to drink is another story. So we had to work patiently in moving the discussions along to get the agreements that we really wanted to get. So we couldn't finalize these documents, which are legally complicated as well. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, we had 3 teams of advisors. We had Porter and Partner, we had White and Case, high-quality lawyers, and gas strategies. So those were backing up the government's position. And of course, as you know, the oil companies would have had a mountain of their technical support as well, and that is what the discussions were. However, the complexity of the Atlantic commercial agreement and the requirement to engage shareholders independently, we got over that, even though they prolonged the negotiations. And of course, these agreements are based on the overarching Government of Trinidad and Tobago principles as set out in the heads of agreement, namely that the Government of Trinidad and Tobago receives equitable and fair upstream returns through the receipt of a net deemed LNG sales, and that Atlantic LNG members earn commercially reasonable levels of profit. I tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, to take you back to March 2018. Some of you, I'm sure, Anthony, you would have been paying attention if you were not there in person. When, having realized what those graphs and those bars mean for Trinidad and Tobago and our economy and our quality of life, the government took the position publicly. You will hear a lot about transparency and accountability, and we want more information and all of that, but you will recall, the government came to the Hyatt Hotel, invited all stakeholders in the energy sector, and before the country and before the world, indicated that the government of Trinidad and Tobago, while respecting the sanctity of contracts, will seek to renegotiate better terms and conditions for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. You probably would have published, you probably would have read at the time, accusations about how irresponsible we were, and a number of talking heads and experts in Trinidad were saying that we were risking foreign investment because we were driving away investors and so on. A lot of nonsense was spoken by people who turned a blind eye to the calamity that was facing us had we not acted and acted boldly. So March 18th is where it started. And you know, interestingly enough, at a meeting in London a couple of days ago, talking to the principals, I didn't mention when Minister Khan and myself went on the platform in Hyatt and laid down the gauntlet to the other partners as to what Trinidad and Tobago's position was. And I said, I trust that you got the message. And the response to me then 2 days ago was, we got it loud and clear. I want to tell you that in approaching these matters, we did not breach or break a single contract. Throughout, we taught and we sold the strength of Trinidad and Tobago, one, in a stable democratic situation, and two, its respect for commercial contracts. But we had an argument for everybody that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are shareholders too. We're not just tax collectors, we are shareholders. And we had our interest in it. And of course, I want to give you 3 examples of the outcome of that approach. With respect to our work and the direct intervention in these 4 specific instances since 2018. 1, with respect to enhanced revenues earned from the negotiation to use pricing of gas based on the basket of indices from August 2018 to September 2023. I'm talking here about revenues that we earned as a result of the changes that we initiated and got agreement to, not the normal agreement. This is in addition to what we would have got. We got $900 million more. The exact figure is $900,494,555. That is equivalent to 6.095 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. That is money that we would not have got if we had just leave it to go the way it was going, as it was going prior to 2018. The second thing is, you probably would have remembered, somewhere along the way, the Minister of Finance introduced a collection of an additional tax, royalty. You would have heard a lot of people talking about the government being tax crazy and this or that. The only significant tax that we levied in this country, new tax, since we came into office, was this: royalty on natural gas at the wellhead. In that way, we laid a claim, because we claim to be the owners of that gas. And as it leaves the wellhead, the people of Trinidad and Tobago must get a benefit immediately. So we introduced royalty. That royalty, NGC, for domestic shortfalls, initially the reaction was that it has to be passed on to NGC. We had to fight that. We had to negotiate that away to allow that royalty to remain with the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That amounted, between October 2018 and August 2023, that amounted to $407 million US. The exact figure is $407,377,447, equivalent to 2.762 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. And of course, you will remember, because you're in the media, you carried it. We complained that we found ourselves in a situation where the gas contracts for the companies using gas at Point Lisas in the petrochemical industry, those contracts either had come to an end or were coming to an end and had to be renegotiated. They were left up in the air. It fell to us to initiate the negotiation in a situation where we had no room to maneuver. The gas contracts were ending and the users had the upper hand on the government. And you remember what they started to do? They started to threaten us in shutting down their companies if they didn't get what they wanted. At least 2 companies shut down their operations, trying to pressure the government into agreeing. Because at that time, the price for gas was relatively low. And what they wanted to do was to force us to enter long-term agreement based on those prices. Even as they shut the plants down, the government stood its ground. And in the end, that passed, because having stood our ground, we did get from them agreements that gave us the following benefit. Had we agreed to enter contracts based on the price levels that existed then, and not in the expectation that those prices were temporary and that the prices could rise, and we didn't want as a government to be left out, we benefit when the prices rise. We stood our ground and we negotiated arrangements that said if the prices rise, we will get part of that benefit too, increased benefit. Eventually that was one, and what they wanted to get, they didn't get, and we got what we wanted to get. And this is, had we not stuck to those agreements and got those agreements, we would have been deprived of $308 million US, based only on the new agreements. And that's an additional 2.156 billion that we would have lost had we not got the agreement by standing our ground when we were threatened with plant closures as part of the contract negotiations in Point Lisas. The total of this, arising out of the government's approach to revisit the arrangements for earnings in the period I just mentioned, is a total of 11 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars. That is the outcome of the spotlight approach on the negotiations and the initiation of new arrangements that we had. That is money that we never would have had. We never would have got had we not engaged in the way we are engaged. So when you hear people, especially those who know, but trying to lead us down the path of foolishness, I was very disappointed when I heard a former Minister of Energy describing our recent accomplishment as no big thing. Ask yourself, what would have been our position in an era of declining volumes production, declining market prices as they do go up and down? What would have been our position had this $11 billion not come into our revenue area? What would have been the decisions in Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm not just talking about 11 billion, I'm talking about the multiplier effect of that as it makes its way through the economy. And you know, what disappointed me most, hearing that kind of comment coming from people who know and in fact who did have some responsibility for addressing this issue earlier, is another issue that we had to deal with, which is in the contracts that existed before, which applied while we were addressing these issues, is that if NGC did not provide gas as per the contracts, those contracts had an arrangement where claims could have been made against NGC for not providing the gas. So as we went into curtailment of gas, and that became noticeable, and there were nervous calls from the people in Point Lisa that something terrible is happening. You were in the media, you would know that the minister at the time told the country, don't worry, we know there's a problem, but that problem is very temporary. It has to do with maintenance. And as soon as the maintenance is over, we'll go back to normal. You carried that in the media. That was the position of the then minister of the previous administration. So we took comfort in that, those who didn't know better. But what was happening is that while the situation was not maintenance, it was a genuinely decline from our fields. That same minister was telling us, but what we need to do also is to give incentives to the oil companies. Amend our regime of incentives, and those incentives will encourage them to drill and produce more gas. That was their solution. But all the time, the bill for the claims from Point Lisa Industries against NGC was growing, because as long as NGC was unable to satisfy the volumes in those contracts, claims were rising and being made against NGC. By the time we engaged that issue and started to negotiate, we were not negotiating only for increased revenue, as I just mentioned. We were also negotiating to get away from those claims. And you know how much those claims were by the time we brought them to a head? The various companies that had claims against NGC, commercial claims, it was $1.3 billion US, equivalent to 8.85 billion Trinidad and Tobago dollars for NGC not being able to supply the gas that it was contracted to supply. So we, who took responsibility for the country's health and wealth, had to sit down and negotiate these. Today I can tell you, Minister Young and his team from the Ministry of Energy and our partners who worked with us negotiated away virtually all of these claims to get the industry back into health. And as we wrote the new contracts and agreed to the new contracts, we have also negotiated out of those contracts that exposure for claims like that to be made against the NGC going forward. So when you hear the former minister telling you about no big thing, I want you to take it in the context of what I just told you. Of course it was no big thing. Maybe it's because it was no big thing why this situation was allowed to go the way it's gone. But maybe, and I'll tell you one more thing. Under the head of incentives were given. You know what those incentives were? that they sought to encourage the companies, especially BP, the biggest supplier of gas, that we will allow you to write off all your expenses that you incur in exploration in the very year that you've done it. Meaning that as fast as that company spent money on exploration, it's shareholders' money, it's banks' money, it could recover and remove that risk immediately, because Trinidad and Tobago would allow them to pay themselves back out of it immediately against taxes that would have been owed to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. As a result of that, within 2 weeks of becoming Prime Minister in 2015, I came face to face with this situation where BP came to me and said, and made presentations in this way, and showed me how with the incentives that they got and the way they will proceed to use those immediate write-off of taxes against the revenue, we could not look forward to any significant revenue from BP, from the gas industry, until 2024. That was September 2015. We could not look for any significant revenue until 2024. The government of Trinidad and Tobago had to act, and as leader of the government, I acted decisively, and you would have seen the human and capital changes that arose from that. So, ladies and gentlemen, those were the challenges. Those were the realities. Those were the dollars that we faced. And those were the issues that attracted the attention of the cabinet, the Prime Minister, the Minister of Energy, and our ministry, and our technical people in the state sector as we went forward. One of the things that we also took on board is that notwithstanding our best efforts, we did not have an extremely rosy picture of growth in our gas production within our border. But we did know that across our border or on our border, there were prospects for increased production of gas to sustain our economy. With respect to the across the border gas, we immediately took steps to engage the government of Venezuela to work out a commercial access in a way that was never done before, which was to allow us to commercially operate a Venezuelan field to get gas for Point Lisas, both for the petrochemical and for the LNG business. We were successful in that. Unfortunately, hurdles came in the way of that as a result of the relationship between Washington and Venezuela. But between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, we did successfully negotiate that unique arrangement. That is still in the pipeline, alive and well, as we cross the very many hurdles. We then looked at the on-border gas, where we were sharing gas fields with Venezuela. And the Loran-Manatee field is a large field, has approximately 10 trillion cubic feet of gas. The border between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela passes through that field, resulting in Trinidad and Tobago laying claim to 27% of that gas, and Venezuela 73%. But in a situation like that, where there's a pool of oil or gas, or any resource for that matter, where the border passes through, it requires an agreement between both countries where you talk about, you unitize the arrangement, and decision making has to be made by both countries to proceed. We pursued that for 15 years, got nowhere. This government took the position that a new approach was required. Again, we approached Venezuela, and we suggested to Venezuela the way to go, the way we would like to go. We would like to have access to our 23%, 27%. To do that, we had to tear up the contracts, the arrangements for unitization. But getting Venezuela to agree to allow us to do that, and then we proceed by Trinidad and Tobago going alone, with Shell as the operator, to bring forward earlier access to our share, which is called Manatee. The Venezuelan share is called Loran. So we are happy that we got that agreement. As a result of that, we were able to press on, fix our arrangement with Shell. One of the agreements we signed in London on Tuesday, was Shell NGC signing the last agreement to allow us to keep going step by step as we have gone. That was the last major agreement to be signed. And you would have carried in your various media where Shell has awarded contracts and have cleared the way for McDermott to get on the field and get on with the engineering, with the question of the platform and pipelines. So we are well on the way to accessing gas from Manatee. And our discussion with Venezuela on Loran is not very far away. So if you do see us going to Venezuela, well, not us, but him and the team, it has to do with those kinds of things where we can now open our discussion with Venezuela, where there are benefits for Venezuela, the people of Venezuela, and people of Trinidad and Tobago, if what starts out as Manatee becomes really Loran Manatee feeding into Point Lisas. Because the one good thing we have going for us, and nobody else has wrong here, is an opening to the international market where the infrastructure is on the ground at Point Lisas, and Trinidad and Tobago is an expert in the pipeline business. That's what we have going for us. That's what we have been selling, arguing for, and defending. Because what I didn't tell you, that the approach that was being pursued at the time when I intervened in 2015 is that the NGC should get out of the business, because the level of risk taken by the government through the NGC is too low to be profiting in the way that we're profiting by the NGC. The government of Trinidad and Tobago said, no way. We are in the business, not just as tax collectors, we are in the business as partners. And all our negotiations, that was the principle, that was the fundamental principle. And when I told this country that I'm this country's #1 salesman, that is what I was talking about. We are partners in the business, owners of the raw resource and partners in the business. As a result of that approach and getting success in that approach, when we came to deal with the demise of Train 1, you would have seen some people jumping up and down, happy to tell you Train 1 has to close down and so on. And of course, we spent $24 million to keep Train 1 in the train business. And that was a big story in and out of the parliament, that we've wasted $24 million. What we did there was to keep Train 1 in Atlantic LNG, so that Trinidad and Tobago, we had 10% ownership. We could remain at the table and negotiate into Trains 2 and Trains 3. To do that, we had to embark upon a restructuring of the Atlantic LNG ownership shareholder structure. That's what that was all about. And I can tell you at the end, what we have signed in London on Tuesday, there's a particular $30 million to be paid. And I seem to recall when I was in primary school that 30 was more than 24. But of course, I mean, they were lying in the parliament that we had spent $400 million and the money was wasted. But we know they didn't understand what they're talking about. All those noises were coming from people who were either delinquent in dealing with this or didn't know what they were talking about. We knew what we were doing. We spent that $24 million. We kept Train 1 on the table. We then had an opportunity to be in the discussions as to what happens to Trains 2, 3, and 4. And the end result is we now have a single shareholding arrangement where even as we take Train 1 out of operation, recovering the money that we spent to be on the table, we are now in ownership, in shareholding, in Trains 2, Trains 3, and continue to own in Train 4. On top of that, we also negotiated new formulae for revenue take. We are no longer bound to a referencing to get our revenue based on Henry Hub or the Lake Charles arrangement in America, which are the lowest prices for gas, because America is awash with gas. So the price of gas at those hubs are low. But in Europe and Asia, the price is high. And of course, those who market gas, and of course you will know Shell is the largest marketer of gas in the world. Shell is our partner in the Hibiscus platform. Shell is our partner with Manatee, right? And elsewhere. So we negotiated an arrangement where revenue streams will come to us now, not from the virtually permanently low Henry Hub reference, but from a basket of market prices, high in Japan, high in Korea, high in Europe, low in the United States, when you average it out, we end up with a better revenue stream. And that is why, even as our volumes are reported to have gone down, the government reacted in this way successfully. You didn't see an equivalent collapse in the revenue in Trinidad and Tobago. So when you hear people talking about the Prime Minister's per diem and Minister Young's many trips, those are the conversations of useless idlers. They have nothing to contribute. Either they don't understand or they're just plain mischievous. These were major, major negotiations with far-reaching consequences. And I tell you something, putting on the table now, had we not been successful in these negotiations, and had we not been successful in coming up with a restructuring of Petrotrin to have Heritage service that $850 million US debt, and the Minister of Finance is still servicing another $400 million, it would have been a good chance that Trinidad and Tobago would have ended up at the IMF. But certainly, we would have ended up with a huge currency devaluation. Those were the options that we were facing. Because in the absence of these successes, what were the alternatives? How do we maintain the expenses that we had become accustomed to? We did not reduce a single item of support in a program for those persons who get support from the state, upwards of $5 billion in the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Every single one of them, social support system. Not a public servant lost his or her job. Not a gazetted public servant lost his or her job because of government's policy to reduce the expenses of the public service. I want the population to understand that these are our realities. And if you do not have success in these areas of pragmatic approaches, dealing with persons who have such influence over us, including the international marketplace, it is not magic. It is not local politics. It is not the career of individuals who believe that they are more important than the country. The vast majority of people in this country benefit from the multiplier effect of the revenues that come. And that brings me to the point. Why are we so heavily dependent on this? It's because of what we have. We do have alternatives, but we have no significant alternative at this time or in the near future. So as the world's markets start talking about, you would have heard about the COP meetings. I went to the COP meeting in Edinburgh. This is a meeting where all world heads meet to talk about the threat that is posed to the world from climate change, where methane and carbon in the atmosphere is driving up the temperature and having all kinds of deleterious effects. You probably would not have known, but in that meeting in Edinburgh, one of the sections that was going beautifully well is a section where certain voices were driving an argument that banks should no longer fund exploration of hydrocarbons. And that was one way to throttle off the use of hydrocarbons in the world. Serious discussion going on. What is Trinidad and Tobago's position on that? Suppose that comes to pass. What happens to Trinidad and Tobago if banks stop funding? Because all these big companies you hear about, they have a lot of money, but they are funded by banks too. They're all part of the banking business. They borrow, they spend, they pay. That's how it is. Borrow billions, make billions, pay billions. That's how it goes. So that argument certainly could not be an argument which should find support from Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname. They've just found. So we decided that we will speak with one voice as CARICOM. No, sir. Trinidad and Tobago's position is, yes, we are aware of the existential threat of climate change, but we also are very aware that our economy is an economy heavily based on hydrocarbons. And we will do what we can and what we must to bring about any improvement that we can. So that's why today we are building, as I speak to you, 10% of our energy use in this country to come from solar power, and we're going to increase that. We are about to start a second phase of that. But while we do that, getting more power for local use from our renewables, we are going to sell our hydrocarbons as long as there's a hydrocarbon market. That is our position. And more than that, we pointed out that there is going to be, for the foreseeable future, at least 2 to 3 decades, the need for energy from hydrocarbons. So the clean energy that we know, which is LNG, we can supply some of that. LNG is clean energy, and we will continue to produce it. The petrochemicals are required, because as the world sets about to feed its population, fertilizer is a major input. And one of the major outputs from Point Lisas using raw gas is fertilizer, ammonia, UAN. So we are in a business that the world needs. And more importantly, we have the infrastructure on the ground, and we live in the vicinity of the subterranean pools of gas and, I dare say, some oil. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are the issues that have engaged your government for the last 9 years, particularly the last 5 years, and most particularly the last year, because these discussions have never been done before. There's nowhere in the world's business of LNG that anybody has ever renegotiated anything like this. But we are not afraid to be trailblazers. When we built the first LNG plant in this country, there were experts and naysayers who were telling us it couldn't be done. Big experts and big naysayers telling us it couldn't be done. Remember Amoco? Remember Amoco? Amoco wanted no part of the conversation on LNG. I was in the cabinet then. It was Professor Julian driving the argument, Patrick Manning in the cabinet, and fortunate for this country, we had 4 geologists in the cabinet at that time. It was a country run by geologists. It was Patrick Manning, myself, Eric Williams, and Frankie Khan. And I dare say we understood the benefits of the hydrocarbon basin. And there was nothing else in sight that offered a prospect for the people of this region than LNG. And we stayed with it. And we fought the argument until BG came into the business and said, well, maybe it could be done. And we had 1 LNG train. And we ended up with 10% in that train. But so uncertain were some people in our future that we started producing LNG in 1995. And 1999, but the discussion that be 95, 99. But the bottom line is, the next 2 trains, we did not keep our place at the table and demanded or ensure that we got a shareholding. We have finally done that now. For the first time, we have a shareholding in trains 2 and trains 3. Because you know what? You saw what happened there. The minute the gas curtailment started, train 1 was a casualty. But those who own trains 2 and train 3, you think they were sad about that? Because we were not there to share in trains 2 and trains 3. We've changed that. So, ladies and gentlemen, going forward, we expect that the market will be as volatile as it can be, as it normally is. Every few months there's a meeting of OPEC attempting to influence the price. We are not a member of OPEC. We can't influence the price. The price sometimes goes up, it goes down. If there's a war, there might be shortages, the price might go up. And that graph you see there, the red line and the blue line, see those steep curves? Part of that had to do with the dramatic increases in the price of some of those products that took place for short term. The prices are no longer up there. They're higher than when they were down there. But that is normal in these businesses. It's an oscillation. And of course, we look at the world market every day. We look at the world news every day to see what is influencing or is influencing us. You probably don't know how closely. We are tied to the decision making. We are affected now. If the situation in Israel spreads and other participants intervene and there are actions and counteractions, while we're not combatants there, our fortunes are intertwined there because we are part of the world market. Our major exports are internationally traded, internationally priced products. And people of Trinidad and Tobago ought not to take it for granted that because we have had a good time with it, and because we are able to say whatever we want about the government or the Prime Minister or the Minister, that changes. That changes nothing. The competence of the government, the vision of the government, and the ability of the government to maneuver out there is what matters. And we have done that, I dare say, successfully for the last few years. And now that we have inked the documents about the restructuring, the comments of the Energy Chamber are the comments that I think most accurately reflect the circumstance. It's a good thing. It's a big thing. What it does, one of the things we negotiated in these new arrangements is for the Atlantic LNG plant to be able to receive gas from what we call third parties. Very important. Up until then, only the shareholders could have brought gas to that plant. So other investors who explore for oil or gas and find gas couldn't bring that gas to market as easily. They probably could have tried to sell it to NGC, and then NGC would on-sell it to the petrochemical sector. But the people who own the plant at Atlantic LNG, they would guard their investment and keep competitors out of it. What we have negotiated and got the agreement for is that gas found by any third party could come to the LNG plant by arrangements to be worked out. What that does now, it means that's a real incentive. Not giving people tax break to write off your expenses, your capital expenses in 1 year, as against over a 5-year period. Now, all the other companies who are not shareholders can now increase their expenses in exploration because the risk has been reduced. If they find gas, the gas can be marketed. So people out in the deep water, like Woodside, who replaced BHP, they can now confidently go after gas in the deep water, knowing that if and when they find resources out there, an offtake is available. The people who are in the waters in Barbados and Grenada, they can now go full speed ahead and sanction their exploration and their seismic work, knowing that if they do make finds, they can bring it to Trinidad's LNG. Because we now have put in the new arrangement the ability to market third-party gas. A simple decision like that would have far-reaching consequences in the boardrooms where decisions are made to spend significant amounts of money looking for a resource where if you find it, you must be able to market it to recover your expenses. So these are, in fact, good developments for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So now more than ever, between 2018 and now, we are in a far better position with respect to attracting the investment. You may ask, why is the government not making the investment? The reason is that we don't want to bankrupt the government. One well could cost, what, $100 million, $200 million, and the hole is dry. How often do you do that? The model is that we allow the external investors to do that. If the hole is dry, then it's written off against other expenses. We take part of that too. But the exploration, the capital that's required, huge amounts of capital required to go and to sustain it. And we allow them to do that. We've negotiated new production sharing contracts, which are more modern, I would say. And we've literally modernized the situation where the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago as partners and as owners of the resource has never been more forcefully put on the table. So when you hear people in Trinidad and Tobago, especially members of parliament, talking about collapse of the energy sector. Please disregard the nonsense. It was a very difficult time. It was a very difficult job. But the outcome, listen to the people who know and who don't have any axe to grind. Listen to what they tell you. And I leave it to your own intelligence to understand that what I've told you here is about giving the people of Trinidad and Tobago the best chance to continue to enjoy a quality of life, at least in the near and medium term, that we have become accustomed to. And without these successes and without these initiatives, it would have been a completely different situation. I told the country in 2016 that the government will manage country's affairs as far as we are able to, without reference to the IMF. We will prescribe our own medicine and we'll take it. Today, 9 years later, the government that I've led, this government has been able to keep that promise to the people of Trinidad and Tobago that we have done all that has been required to be done, difficult as it was, without reference to support to the lender of last resort. And if you think that's a joke, just go and look and see how many of our neighbors, how many economies in the Caribbean are retained by IMF support. And I want the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand, wherever you are in this economy, whether you are a businessman, whether you are a shareholder in a business, whether you are an employee in a business or working for the government, just understand that if this country ever finds itself in a situation where it cannot, of its own accord, service its debt and manage its national budget, nobody is going to lend you money as a lender of last resort and allow you to continue to do the following things while they're bolstering your economy with lending. One, free secondary education from cradle to university. Free health care with leading edge technology in every hospital. Subsidizing water, subsidizing electricity, subsidizing gasoline. You would have seen the reaction as we reduced the subsidy on gasoline. Oh, some people behave as though the sky had fallen. But that's only one of the subsidies maintained by the government to and for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. If we ever find ourselves anywhere on an IMF street, the quality of life of everybody in this country will be threatened, because a lot of what the government carries on its payroll now will not be permitted in any significant way. We spend over $5 billion a year supporting citizens who are least able to look after themselves. And this is a cash distribution. If you have to go and borrow IMF money, the first thing they start looking for is to see where you need to withdraw from much of that expenditure. So if you don't appreciate what the government has done, try and figure out, if those situations are not allowed to continue, how it will affect you. That's what you need to do. We need to know more about our country in this way, and I've asked the Minister of Energy to ensure that this conversation is not put under anybody's shade, is not twisted, and that the population knows the facts. There are certain aspects of these discussions which will remain confidential, as you expect.
I didn't expect that.
You didn't expect that?
No, not
well,
based on what you said the last time.
You better expect it, because this is competition. This is international competition, and there are certain aspects of these decisions that remain confidential. As a matter of fact, in the contract, certain things are contracted to remain confidential. Those are the commercial pricing arrangements. That's what it is. That's why I gave you, I just told you I'm sharing with you some pages from the cabinet note. Have you ever had that before? Has any prime minister ever come before you? Prior, you've been around a long time. Any prime minister ever come before you and share with you the actual pages of a cabinet note? But you are shareholders in this business. Anthony, you are a shareholder in many places. So you know that if you are a shareholder, there are certain responsibilities, and we are a responsible country. And I started off by telling you In the face of all these changes for our benefit, we did not break a single contract. We didn't have a single lawsuit going on fighting over a contract. It was all by negotiations, and this is a good time for me. I want to congratulate Minister Young and the Ministry of Energy and the staff at the Ministry of Energy and the advisors to the minister. You will get to know them as the minister talks to you exactly who they are, and the professional help that we hired to work with us in this. They are all worthy of congratulations. And some of the world's biggest businesses, Shell, largest marketer of gas, BP, major producer of, they don't get into negotiations with a country like ours in particular, small country, 1.4 million people, and spend years, hours, weeks, and days negotiating with them to then come up for a joke. It's not a joke. These were serious negotiations with serious consequences. Fortunately for us, the consequences are worthy of the effort, and our future is brighter as a result of the nature of the agreements that we have had. So I'll leave it there for now, and there are a couple other things I want to mention. We received eventually the report of the Lynch Commission of Inquiry, and immediately I did receive a very impertinent request from a member of the media asking me whether I thought the report should be made public immediately before it has been basically tampered with by the cabinet. I find that to be an impertinence. The cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago is the place where the business of the people of Trinidad and Tobago is conducted by responsible representatives. That's how I see it, that's how we know it. And if a commission of inquiry is working, a lot of people had a lot to say while the evidence was being taken, and the government allowed it to happen. We didn't influence any of it. In fact, at least initially the government's position was to go very quickly with a technical investigation. We get to the bottom of it. There was an argument that no, this one will put it under the carpet and this one would protect Paria. That was it. A commission of inquiry had to be had. We agreed to that. Commission of inquiry. $15 million of probably legal fees mostly, right? But the bottom line is a commission of inquiry was allowed to sit unimpeded, gather evidence, come to conclusions, and eventually the report came. And I trust that it doesn't matter how anxious one is, that you'll allow the cabinet to receive it, and as soon as the cabinet would have received it, the cabinet will take steps to lay it in the appropriate place as soon as possible. It's going to the cabinet will look at it, and it will come to the parliament at the earliest. So this question about the report being sanitized, that's the word, sanitized. Absolute nonsense. There's no intention whatsoever to have anything done to the report in the context of sanitizing and protecting A, B, C, or D. The report goes to the responsible body, which is the cabinet, and it will then move on to the parliament, and I trust the legal conundrums will be worked out as we go forward. The other thing I want to mention, but before I go there, I'll just tell you what my dilemma is. This is not the first commission of inquiry that has been concluded in relatively recent time. We had the CLICO collapse, and subsequent to that collapse, where the government intervened and took on the responsibility of billions of dollars, that inquiry, that was the Coleman inquiry, a report was finally concluded. Testimony was collected in public, there was cross-examination, and we waited patiently and expensively. Huge expenses went into that inquiry. The report came, and in the normal procedure, the report was submitted to me as Prime Minister. As I just said, the intention was to lay it in the Parliament. I shared it with the Attorney General, and if my memory serves me right, it was shared with the Director of Public Prosecution, because in that report there was a specific recommendation that 2 or 3 people, I think it was, should face further criminal examination. I could tell you now that as I attempted to put that report in the Parliament, the Director of Public Prosecution intervened and basically directed that the report not be laid in the Parliament because it would influence negatively or inappropriately the criminal prosecution that was imminent.
Imminent 8 years ago.
As a responsible Prime Minister, I did not lay that report in the Parliament based on the intervention of the Director of Public Prosecution, because the expectation was imminent action was due from those quarters. I'm not aware. It may have happened and I didn't notice, or it's happening and I don't notice. But as far as I'm aware, that report is still under that sanction. In the meantime, I've listened to some of my colleagues, parliamentarians again, accusing me and the government of hiding the report and leaving it on the shelf to gather dust and those kinds of comments. I could tell you, none of those comments have any validity. The only reason why that report was not laid in the Parliament was because of the request of the Director of Public Prosecution to refrain from doing so, so as to allow certain criminal prosecutions to take place. I will tell you something else too. There was a commission of inquiry into the National Stadium that was overloaded for a cricket match and damaged for World Cup football. Huge expenses accrued to the taxpayer to rectify that situation after. And there was a commission of inquiry, the Simongal inquiry, which you, the media, were following. After many moons of Simongal and nothing being produced, the Manning government had to take the difficult decision to end what was appearing to be an endless, cost-incurring inquiry, where the principal actor was never called before the inquiry. And we had no idea if he was going to be called or when that inquiry would have ended. But as owner of the funds that were paying Simongal, the cabinet took a decision to end it. I can tell you now, a similar situation exists with the Coleman inquiry. And the government will have to take a decision. Because after the last time I inquired, the figure that I seem to recall is $100+ million spent on that inquiry. And I don't know of a single page of any report produced by it. There was one situation where the recipient of that largesse accosted me in lobby of a payment, a particular payment. And when I inquired what was the size of the payment, on that occasion, the payment was, I think, $45 million. And when I asked what has been submitted so far, I was told that the company had read 30 million pages of CLICO documents. I saw sometime later on that there was a statement in the public domain that the company had concluded scanning the CLICO documents. Apparently the assignment was to scan every document that CLICO ever had. Because I know Enron, within 6 months, the Enron matter had come to a head and people were held accountable in the Enron inquiry. And Enron was billions of dollars. The bottom line is, if we have spent over $100 million in scanning every page in CLICO's history, how much we intend to pay to have them read? And the people of Trinidad and Tobago will have to take a decision as to whether this largesse should continue or whether we should cut our losses. Because this is 2009, this whole thing started. It is now 2023, and I am minded to advise the cabinet to put an end to this. I have a businessman friend, who always tells me his bit of wisdom: your first loss is your best loss. We have to take a decision on this matter. And with respect to the Venezuela-Guyana situation, I must mention this largely because the opposition was on, again this morning, I gathered there was a taped program pretending to be a live program this morning, and made a very important mention about driving mediation in the Venezuela-Guyana matter. It is very concerning to me that our opposition in Trinidad and Tobago seems to make a career of undermining our national foreign policy or CARICOM policy. I don't know why they do it, but they do it every time. Anybody who pretends to want to speak about the Guyana-Venezuela situation and asking a government, your home government or CARICOM, to intervene as mediators would know that you are going against the position of the people of Guyana. The people of Guyana are firm in their position. I speak to the president on an ongoing basis as a head of CARICOM. This has been in front of us a long time. Guyana does not encourage and does not require its problem to be dealt with by any mediation with Venezuela at this time. Guyana places its store and its fortunes in the adjudication of the International Court of Justice. That is Guyana's position. Venezuela's position is they do not recognize that court. So we have to find some other avenue, or negotiations and dialogue will have to evolve to a place where both one person can mediate. For there to be mediation, the parties, that's a requirement of mediation. The parties have to subject themselves to mediation. One person cannot mediate something against somebody else. And I think the opposition should know that and should shut up. Because all those interventions are doing is worsening the situation for the people of Guyana. And if we say we're supporting Guyana, we can't be supporting them verbally and undermining what they believe is their best approach. There's a government in Trinidad and Tobago, and I dare say the politics should stop at the borderline. At this time, I'll take a question or two because it's a busy day.
I have 7 factual questions and 1 philosophical question.
Which one is
7? The factual questions: when was the agreement signed? Details on the ownership of Atlantic under the unitized arrangement. Details of the basket of benchmarks that you referred to. In other words, what are the components and how is this benchmark, new basket of benchmarks organized? How long is this agreement for? How many billions does the government expect to get from this agreement?
Is that a factual one or that's a philosophical one?
No.
Well, Anthony, let me tell you something from early. One, I'm not going to stand here and go into the details, the dollars and cents details of contracts. We have competitors, we have competition, and I could tell you though that the Minister of Energy might be able to give you a little more details on a couple of your questions there. But I'm not going to go into the innards of those contracts. We don't do that.
Prime Minister, when you spoke here, right here where you are, on November the 20th, I believe, I asked you, Prime Minister, are you going to give details of the billions of dollars that this new arrangement will generate?
Well,
and you said, of course I will.
I gave you the details of the billions that accrued in a period that has passed, right? As a result of the beginning of these arrangements. We now have put these arrangements and similar arrangements in place to go forward. One can sit down and do some projections. The best that you can have now are projections. Because as I said to you, the market oscillates, so these projections are not hard and fast cast in stone. And of course, they are also exposed to things that can jolt the market. So yes, it's possible to sit down. As a matter of fact, only yesterday, Minister Young and I were trying to answer that same question. What does, let's say, we can say what the next 5 years is or what the next 10 years, but then there's a huge, all things being equal, to apply to that formula. So I don't know how, we don't want to get involved in this purest accuracy, but suffice it to say that the formula as a mathematical entity will show you that it will be an improvement. How much in exact dollars? I couldn't tell you that.
At least tell us what the formula is.
Well, the details of the formula might require a certain amount of cover for the moment, but we might be able to, I can tell you, as I said earlier on, we use the price in the Asian market,
Japan, Korea.
Right, and we use the British, the European and Henry Hub, and when you bring those three together, the averaging of that is where our revenue receipts will be anchored. So without telling you $10 or $12, I've given you the formula.
So Brent has been taken out of it?
No. Well, Minister Young, just remember that we have contractual obligations and we have interest to protect. So Minister Young, I call him to give you a little more detail on that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. To answer one of the first questions, initially it's a 25-year agreement. All right, because what you're doing is you're extending the liquefaction licenses 2, 3, and 4.
And it comes into force when?
The first part will come into force in October 2024, which is next year, when 2 and 3 expire, and then 4 expires in 2027, if I remember correctly.
You will see that in the 3 pages I've given you in the cabinet notes. So I told you you'll get some more information. That in that 3 page, you will see those 2 references.
What we did manage to negotiate is that is not the start date of the kick-in of the benefits to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and the Prime Minister outlined some of the benefits we've gotten so far. Without breaching the confidentiality provisions, the formula, and it is a different formula, again, as the Prime Minister outlined, because we cannot get involved in price fixing, where there are different entities at play, 3 here, NGC, Shell, and BP. You have JKM, which is a marker for the Asian market. You have something called TTF, and you have NBP. So TTF and NBP are out of Netherlands and the United Kingdom. And then the third marker is actually a discount on Brent. Because we decided, let us make sure and peg as well that we could get benefits from liquids, as you see with the price of oil and gas. And of course, the benefit of that should be understood immediately, because the price of oil is always a higher price than gas. And we can't go in any further than that.
Okay? Yes.
Is the shareholding my philosophical question?
Your colleagues have a real question, but let's get this philosophical question out of the way. Yes, Anthony, go ahead.
Right. We started exporting LNG in this country in 1999. 24 years later, they're saying, so we started with, as we said, 10% in train 1, and several years down the road, 11% in train 4. So 24 years later, is My understanding is that what we have in trains 2, 3, and 4 is now 10%. But the question is, after more than 100 years in the energy industry and 24 years in LNG, why did we not seek a greater percentage of Atlantic than 10%?
That's a very useful question, because I asked myself that, and I came to the conclusion that it had to do with confidence. At the time when we were going into the business, we probably didn't have the confidence that it would be so successful, so we wanted a bigger share, because a bigger share means a bigger risk. And we were quite content to accept the proceeds from the other people's shareholding, but our risk level, because these are very risky businesses. And I told you earlier on how much negative there was with respect to the coming into being of Train 1. There was a strong view that Train 1 was going to be a bad idea. And of course, it could fail. And therefore, if that environment exists to people who are entering it, putting your foot in the water for the first time, the risk of 10%, those were huge amounts of dollars as well. We preferred to spend our money on the pipeline. Remember that 54-inch pipeline? That was a huge expense for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So that was less risky and had the prospect of earning as against spending your money as a shareholder in a plant that may not be successful. However, my view in going down the road with you philosophically is that other people with deeper pockets saw a brighter future when Trains 2 and Trains 3 came along, and they offered very quickly to take up all the risk. And the people of Trinidad and Tobago didn't push back on that. And then, of course, you may recall there was a question, things were going so well in their part, and they were so eager that there was a talk about a Train X, a Train 5. Remember that story? And the Train 5 conversation only died when we started to be pulled back to reality that we may not have the sizes of the fields of gas to support 5 trains. But by that time, we had become a little more confident. So we took 11% in Train 4. So we evolved. That's how it went.
From 10 to 11%?
From 10 in Train 1, losing or not fighting for any in Trains 2 and 3, and by that time, then 11% in Train 4.
Yeah, but then we come back to 10% in Trains 2, 3, and 4. Would you not agree with me, Prime Minister, that the 24-year history of our engagement in LNG has de-risked the investment in LNG?
Well, 10% of 3 trains as against 11% of 1 train. I think you do the maths on that. We are a whole lot better off with 10% in the unified business. Right? So you want to talk to that, Mr. Young? Give a little detail on that? Because what we ended up with now is 10% of the whole business as against 11% of 1/3 of the business.
Thanks a lot, Prime Minister. Work out the prorata. Prorata of 10% in 1 and 11% in 4 is about 5.4% across all four trains. Train 1 engineering-wise remains because it's the first train, and you're really, to use simple language, you're tacking on the other 2, 3, and 4 to it. So we got an increased shareholding from 5.4%, which is what we own with 10 and 11, to 10%, an uplift to 10%, at no cost to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
And that is important.
That is important. You also then continue to have risk, because as you carry forward a shareholding, not only do you have capital contributions that inevitably will come up, that mean cash contributions, you also have to bring gas, because you now carry a capacity as well, and can't go any further than that. But as you could envisage, shareholding sounds nice, but it comes with certain things. The people of Trinidad and Tobago, because of what the Prime Minister, myself in support, did, got from about 5.4%, which is what we owned, up to 10 at no additional cost You go and price now 3 trains with a 4th train, train 1, as a complex, even however many 20 years later, that is billions and billions of dollars.
So just by the way, question number 7 on my list of factual questions was, what is the market value of Atlantic LNG today?
I wouldn't pretend to want to answer that because I haven't seen a valuation recently. I'll just say valuable. Yes, Ria. I'm coming to you, Jewel. Yes, Ria.
Guyana's vice president.
Let's LNG question from Jewel, eh?
Well, yes.
Yeah, let me come back to you in Guyana.
But it's more on the issue of the additional revenue you had talked about in the negotiations and so on of recent vintage. 11 billion, I think, in total, you would have said?
The 3 or 4 areas that I specifically mentioned had come to 11 billion.
Right, so I think maybe people might want to know in Trinidad and Tobago, where would this additional revenue have gone to?
Oh, good question. It would have gone to the shareholders of other companies. Because understand something, what we have done is to ask for a better sharing. If we didn't get it, somebody else would have got it. And that is where the international business operates. And the conversation that I've been carrying is that your shareholders are happy. You look for your shareholders. At the Spotlight, we introduced the concept of the people of Trinidad and Tobago as shareholders in those profits. Understand? So that was a fundamental position in the conversation. Your shareholders can't be reporting and receiving increased profits every year, while my shareholders are approaching bankruptcy. Understood? That was the backbone of the argument.
Just a follow-up, if you don't mind, Prime Minister. So then, so people may ask, for example, just for clarity, things like, is it, when you get these additional revenues, right, do they go into the consolidated fund, do they go into public projects, or how does it work?
The consolidated fund gathers all government revenues of this nature, and then they're redistributed for as per the parliamentary allocation. There are no separate special fund. But, you know, the taxes come in, whether it's royalty. So, and one stream of it comes out of the NGC, right, which is 100% state-owned, and which the Minister of Finance gets certain, when they have money in their kitty, the Minister of Finance uses that to support the national budget. So when we say government, we include the NGC as an earning location, because the NGC is contracted to do certain things and to receive the proceeds. Yes, Ria.
Guyana's vice president, Barack Jacques, has said that President Maduro and his regime are untrustworthy. My question is, do you trust the word of a leader who is capable of such a blatant disregard of international norms, rules, and regulations? And do you fear that such an individual and such a government may be predisposed to breaking contracts at women fancy? And I'm speaking here in the context of Trinidad and Tobago. You said earlier that the deal is alive and well, the discussions with respect to Dragon are alive and well. And so I'm asking the question, do you think that this is a man that we should...
There's a place for trust in dealing with leaders, international officials, and there's a place for doing business, and they're not really qualifying me as any expert in mental health or truth bar. What I can tell you is that Trinidad and Tobago's position is that we maintain good, honest and direct relationships with all our neighbors, including Venezuela. And we are We conduct ourselves on certain principles. And if you look at the world, you will see very many people conducting business with people who they probably wouldn't go to church with or wouldn't marry their daughter. We have very good relations with Venezuela, with Guyana, and let me just point out that the capital of CARICOM, the Secretariat of CARICOM, is in Georgetown. And our approach, whether it is a problem between Venezuela and Guyana, or Guyana and the United States, our approach has been to follow certain fundamental principles so that we can preserve ourselves as an honest broker and also follow the principles which brought us and from which we have anchored ourselves since independence. Difficulties will arise and difficulties will be dealt with. We are not going to be stoking any fire, but we also will ensure that we take the position to all our partners and neighbors that this region is better off and should always be a zone of peace.
I have two comments on that. One is that so far there is no country supporting Venezuela in its actions. And the term used by President Ali, and I see it in a Starbuck News editorial, that Venezuela is becoming an international outlaw. Do we want to associate ourselves?
I am not, if nobody is supporting Venezuela on an adventure, from where we are in CARICOM, that might be a good thing. It would have been a real problem if it was otherwise. But I think the people of Venezuela probably would have seen that too. If you are going to embark on something and nobody is supporting it, then it ought to influence your thought process. So that might be a good thing. But again, the world is not as straightforward as that. Because supporting Venezuela in what? It all depends in doing what. And you know, we here in CARICOM this afternoon we have a meeting in a little while where we'll discuss these things a little further. But we trust that we don't see an escalation in the intentions or the actions, because none of that is good for the region.
The final question I have is that there is a view that Trinidad and Tobago, because of its closeness to both countries, to both Guyana and to Venezuela, should, notwithstanding the fact that it is part of CARICOM and it's part supporting the CARICOM statement, should separately denounce or separately take a position. When I say separately, not separate from CARICOM, but to speak individually on this matter. And I think people who have raised that have pointed out that in the past, when there was the threat of military intervention in Venezuela, at least that was part of a conversation during the 2016 and 2020 period by the previous American administration, you took a very a strong and a leadership role in advocating that there should be no such action, and CARICOM took that position too, but you personally came out on many occasions and you presented the Trinidad and Tobago position. And there is therefore a view that I don't want to say we are being silent, but that in not taking the same leadership role, that we are appearing to be hiding behind CARICOM on this issue, as opposed to...
I would not for 1 minute shy away from the fact that Trinidad and Tobago's position is at CARICOM, that we are more effective in all matters, especially matters of this nature, when we speak with one voice. I see no additional benefit with each member getting up and, establishing his or herself separate and apart from the position they take at CARICOM. And have no fear, Trinidad and Tobago's leadership role in CARICOM has not diminished, but circumstances and times are different. And sometimes the strategy you will pursue on one day is not the most effective strategy for another day. In this situation, Trinidad and Tobago maintains its closeness with both parties and speak to both parties without giving up any of our principled positions. And that puts us in a more effective way of being an honest broker between parties where there's so much daylight between them. And therefore to prove that we are big and bad and speaking loudly in one direction or the other, we will not diminish our effect in that way. And there's no doubt in any quarter as to where Trinidad and Tobago stands with this, because we have been the advocates for a joint CARICOM position, speaking with one voice. And you're right, when we had to go to the UN to invoke the UN Charter as protection, we did so as CARICOM. And when we speak now to Venezuela about its intention to Guyana, CARICOM speaks with one voice in the context of international conduct. So I am not going to be moved by anybody talking about hiding behind. That is just, not worth a response from me. Because if I could hide behind CARICOM, there's no better place to hide. But there's no reason to hide. One of the things we have done, Trinidad and Tobago, is ensure that our bona fides in international affairs and international diplomacy is not open to reasonable question from people who are reasonable.
Two quick follow-ups, Prime Minister, on that point, if you don't mind.
I'll hear the lady on this. And your name is?
Dr. Rowley Polo from Guardian Media. So, piggybacking off of some of the questions from Ria, Mr. Jagdeo also mentioned that if the Venezuelan president were to continue with his miscalculations, that he would be seeking Guyana sanctions to be reimposed, the same sanctions that he said CARICOM had agreed Venezuela should have gotten some reprieve from at the request of TNT. Do you have any concerns about that, especially heading into this CARICOM meeting?
I haven't heard that, and I would not be... the various leaders who choose to speak, I would give them their latitude to speak and express themselves as they see fit, as we in Trinidad and Tobago see fit. And if there's anybody who is asking for sanctions on Venezuela, which are detrimental to CARICOM or to Trinidad and Tobago, that's a conversation that they want to carry. But I would do nothing to worsen the situation if I were given the opportunity to do so.
Prime Minister, an LNG question. I believe Mr. Young said that the contract begins in October 2024 and goes on for 25 years. Yes? Right. What happens between...
Some in 2024, some aspects in 24, some in 2027.
Okay, so what, in terms of the pricing formula, what happens between now and October 2024?
The arrangements that were in place which brought us the enhanced revenues that I mentioned, those arrangements are in place.
So in other words, we've gone to the new basket.
More or less. We've had the improved arrangement that led us up to the signing of the contracts going forward. Those arrangements are in place. So we are getting improved revenues.
And how much money did that arrangement lead to revenue for Trinidad and Tobago? Do you know?
Well, I just gave you for the period 2018 to 2023 August, and I told you in total If you 11 billion, and I told you what that 11 billion covered, it included the increased revenues we got from petrochemicals under the new arrangement that we put in place. Had we not got those new arrangements, we would have got significantly less than the 2.7 billion from petrochemicals. So it's not a straight line on any one thing. It's a number of lines, because the petrochemical earning is different to the natural gas earning at LNG.
Some points, Prime Minister, on the issue of the Guyana-Venezuela matter. Have you had any direct conversations with President Maduro on this issue? Do you communicate with him on any sort of regular basis?
Trinidad and Tobago is in constant communication with Venezuela, and we are in constant communication with Guyana. I would not reduce our communication to individuals, because we believe that these countries are more than individuals. Maduro is not Venezuela, and Venezuela is not Maduro. And of course, in Guyana, I've heard a lot of reference to President, to Vice President Barr, Jacques Deau. There's a lot of the talking. I do a lot of my talking with President Fanali, and he, I'm sure you know, if you speak to him, he will tell you that he counts in Trinidad and Tobago for leadership in CARICOM and cooperation.
So Trinidad and Tobago could be, but is it be in a very interesting or particularly difficult situation, because you have, as you said, CARICOM's position in support of Guyana, which you said Trinidad and Tobago supports. You're doing the drug and gas deal with Venezuela. Do you think there's a possibility Venezuela, the government may want Trinidad and Tobago to say, well, look, they would like a statement in support of them? Where does that put us if that happens?
I'm sure everybody would like people to come out and support their position, but these are, you know, international, diplomatic, commercial, and, you know, neighborly trading. To want something and to expect to get it is another story. You know, but we're not children. These are serious matters, and it doesn't mean that because Venezuela has taken a position that it will drag Trinidad and Tobago along. I noticed a number of hawkish conversations from some people. It might sell the news, but I'm sure in where calmer heads exist, that the conversations are a little different.
Prime Minister, the issue, given America's stance, you know, against Venezuela in this matter, do you think we should rethink our position in terms of drug and gas? And even though we could...
Why are you also obsessed with this drug and gas thing? The bottom line is, that's a commercial arrangement where there's raw material, and we have put proposals to the owner to try and buy it. I've heard somebody said we have all our eggs in one basket. Mr. Young, come up here and tell the country how many eggs we have in any basket. It's time for this. What do we do? Just throw hands up in the air and say, well, there are issues, there are challenges? No. These are all matters outside of our control. And insofar as we are able to influence them, we continue to do so, because we travel in hope and expect to arrive in victory.
Just very briefly, because as the Prime Minister said, he's tasked me in the coming weeks to have the conversations, to give more details as to what's been going on.
I want to speak specifically about this nonsense about the government having all its eggs in one basket and dragon.
You heard the conversation about deep water gas. We have progressed deep water gas. Everybody talks about that. We are already well progressed. The leadership from Woodside is meeting with me next week, because I was in London with the Prime Minister, and at every stage we announce that. That's one area. We have just had a successful onshore, nearshore bid rounds where we've put it out. You're seeing for the first time under us that we're getting significant volumes of gas, molecules of gas from onshore. That is as a direct result of our work. The shallow water bid rounds have gone out. We have a lot of interest. In fact, the Prime Minister was in meetings in London this week with some other people, and they also expressed their interest, as did Petronas when they met with us, which is another new entrant and player. So there's a lot of interest taking place there as well. You've heard of significant other areas where we've worked with existing entities, and we've allowed sidetrack drilling, deeper drilling of wells and these types of things. The cabinet has given full support, allowed us to do that. That is what is keeping volumes coming. We have EOG. We have also done a lot of work with other persons like Parenco, the EOG, the Touchstone, and you're seeing volumes coming there. So all of our eggs are never in the energy sector in one basket, and this is why we continue to have these conversations, and you're seeing the direct results of that type of work.
And the most significant thing that's happening in the near term is what we have accomplished at Manatee. Right? And I mentioned that early on. And of course, as I said, with what we have accomplished with the restructuring and third-party gas having access to LNG production, that will stimulate interest all around in the basin. Okay? So if there are interferences that ultimately impact negatively on Dragon, then so be it. But on the other hand, if we're able to overcome those difficulties, then we have access to the field. But the documentation so far and the sovereign agreement, sovereign to sovereign, that is in place. It is the external interference that we have to worry about, and we have no control over that. And so anybody who thinks that the solution to Guyana's problem is to call for sanctions, it would not be in the context of stopping Dragon. So whether gas was flowing from Dragon or not, the difficulty in Essequibo would exist. That's a different issue. It's a different issue.
As you for Manatee, right? Are we also looking at Lauren and would you get permission and a license?
Permission that I told you, the Lauren component is the property of Venezuela. But when you look at the logic of it, if there's a pipeline and a platform built by Trinidad and Tobago for the purpose of extracting gas from that field to come to the west coast of Trinidad, and you own the gas in Lauren, what would you do? Right? And you would have heard in that meeting that Minister Young had with President Maduro, it was Venezuela who expectedly referenced the fact that with Manatee on the go, Lauren is right behind.
Prime Minister, I want to ask you a question about why did CIC, the Chinese company, withdraw from Atlantic, and did they sell their shares in the company?
I don't have that information to discuss publicly in this way, so I'll have to pass on that one.
Okay. And there's a question that you are definitely going to be asked in Parliament, so you might as well. Yeah.
Really? Anthony, you're very well connected.
No, so the question is, how much money did the government spend on its 3 sets of advisors in the restructuring matter?
In the scheme of things, chick feed. These are multi-billion-dollar. They are multi-billion-dollar business, multi-billion-dollar enterprises. So paying for high-quality legal support is a given. And whatever the figure is, it would be a drop in the ocean of the business. And if, you know, it was Carl Hudson Phillips who had made the famous statement, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Monkeys won't help in this situation. We hired top-class legal support to successfully challenge and make the kind of changes that we need, and we've got those changes made. So legal fees, as you know, they're not cheap, but without them, the outcome could be disastrous. And I say one thing else too, the negotiations with these gas contracts, when you start talking about billions and 1 cent in the wrong place could result in huge outcomes over a period of time in the marketplace. So you have to know what you're doing, and you have to get proper advice. You can't be penny wise and pound foolish.
Right. Prime Minister, you raised the issue of the Coleman Commission of Inquiry report, which was sent to which the DPP advised you or the cabinet.
When was that?
I believe it was 2016, June, perhaps 2016.
Isn't that far?
Pen,
No, I don't think no. Yeah, but the report didn't come in 2016. It was a bit later on than that.
pending criminal investigations into the Clico people.
Imminent.
Imminent, right. 6 or 7 years later, nothing has been heard about the DPP's inquiries. Is it not time to write the DPP and ask him whether, given the fact that there have been no developments with regard to the then imminent prosecution?
That matter is a matter for the Attorney General. The Prime Minister will not be writing the DPP. The Attorney General's office is the interface with the DPP. And question is yes, don't you do that?
Staying with the issue of commissions of inquiry, the Pario report. Sorry, Gregory McBurney from Trinidad Newsday.
Yes, carry on.
Right, so staying with the issue of the commissions of inquiry, the Pario report, has Cabinet received it, and can you give a timeline as to when you think you will make some sort of intention in terms of laying it in the relevant places?
It is going to the Cabinet. I got it the night before I left here. Yeah, I got it the night before I left on one of these trips. I read this. I read the executive summary. I'm currently reading the details. It's quite voluminous, but fortunately the commissioner has given us electronic copies, so it's going to go electronically to the Cabinet this coming week. And I couldn't tell you. I wouldn't want to prejudge the Cabinet until it's before the Cabinet. As I said earlier on today, it will move on to the Parliament as quickly as possible after that.
Prime Minister, I'll follow up on this question about the advisors. Were you concerned that the advisors in London, that their clients are also BB and Shell?
You think so?
I'm asking.
You think we'll hire a law firm that has?
And case and why?
We have ensured that we get the best technical advice, and we are aware of no such conflict. And what we did is to find the legal expertise from people who had the skill and the experience to treat with the people that we're going to talk to.
And earlier you said you didn't only market value of Atlantic. Was that prudent to go into negotiations and not only market value?
But I did also mention about spurious accuracy. I did mention that we did not engage in spurious accuracy. I would not stand here and tell you I know the value of Atlantic LNG, except to tell you that we were dealing with great value, which required our attention. I have not seen a valuation done of Atlantic LNG, and I wouldn't profess to speak to it.
And can you clarify the shareholding now? You know, when is the 10% kick in? Is it after 2023, 2024, or is it after 2027? How does that work? In terms of the gap between 2023 to 2027, what happens?
There are a series of contracts that spread over a period of time, and as those contracts come up, the dates that we set, right, would see moving from one state to the other, right? So the closure, right, is not one day on one contract. It's and that's why we said 2024, 2027, things are happening in between.
So on 2024 to 2027, we NGC would not have the 10% shareholding in 2 and 3 at that point in time.
Explain that, Minister, because we're going to get into. I don't want us to go off track, but I want you to get the facts from the minister, right? Just bear in mind that we are...
The confidentiality provisions, and I have a fair idea of where this question and line of question is coming from as well. The contractual arrangements are what the Prime Minister has outlined. You're going to be provided, as he said, with a cabinet note that provides as much detail as we can provide. The provisions that we have negotiated, the people of Trinidad and Tobago are already getting the benefits of it. The date, the magic in the date of 2024 is when the liquefaction licenses for trains 2 and 3 expire. So by definition, if that expires and you're renewing it, it means we will be getting the enhanced benefits from that period onwards. You then have the expiry of train 4 happening at a later date, and that will kick in at a later date because of the complexity of the contracts, and that is what governs these things, because you have different shareholders, BP and Shell, who have contracts with off-takers for the LNG that take them to those points in time. So this is logical. There's no magic in it. This is what one would expect if one appreciated the complexities of it. Thank you.
Right. We have a last question from Jules.
This is a non-energy question. The Ministry of the Attorney General announced yesterday there will be the proclamation of the act that will replace the preliminary inquiry system with the new sufficiency hearing system. So I'm wondering, have you or the government has a sense of the state of readiness of, let's say, the judiciary, the DPP's office, the police service, the state, all those stakeholder state institutions in dealing with a new system that is supposed to be a more efficient system to get rid of the delays in the justice system?
Well, this is a fundamental change that we are embarking upon, right? And I expect that there may be one or two teething things, or there are consequential adjustments that have to be made. But my understanding is, if you recall, that this bill was passed into law a long time ago. We took it through the Parliament. We didn't immediately operationalize it. It wasn't proclaimed. The period between then and now was to be able to do exactly what you're touching on there, to get all the stakeholders to prepare themselves to function in this new environment. And my understanding is that, yes, it is so. And if there are people who are not prepared, get your act together. The train has left the station. Thank you very much.